What's going on YouTube? It's Tej back again with another video, and today we're on to the NFC South. Just 3 divisions left in our 2021 NFL season preview series. We start the NFC South with talking about the Atlanta Falcons. Hopefully you all enjoy today's video. If you do, please hit that like button. It would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider subscribing and give me your Falcons takes down below. How many wins do you think this team has? What are some goals, X factors, games you're looking forward to watching them play? Love to have your thoughts. I respond to every comment. So let's talk about the Falcons down below. Without further ado, this is kind of a tough team to peg a win range for because, right, like Matt Ryan's good. Calvin Ridley is a young, up-and-coming wide receiver. I love Kyle Pitts as a player. Arthur Smith is a fantastic offensive mind. So all that, plus a pretty solid offensive line. Some defensive players on that side of the ball are pretty good. Grady Jarrett, Deion Jones. There's a couple pieces to work with there. We'll talk about the defense here in a moment. But given the high-end talent, it feels kind of crazy to say win range starting with 5. But where they are weak, they are extremely bad. Like they need to find some other corners to go along with AJ Terrell, who really, I think he played pretty well in the second half of last year, but he needs to put together a full season looking like what he was the last, 6 to 8 games of last season. And along with finding a second corner, like I like Richie Grant, but they have to find some long-term answers there. Maybe Grant is one of those 2 safeties. They're going to have to find that out this year. And then their pass rush is just abysmal outside of Grady Jarrett. I mean, they are pathetic, honestly. I'm not saying that I'm an NFL pass rusher by any stretch of the imagination, but by NFL standards, it's pretty bad. So where they are weak, they are among the weakest in the NFL. Where they are good, they are very solid. So it's kind of tough to put a win range. So 5-9 feels about right. 9-8 feels like a pretty successful first year with Arthur Smith. And if I were a Falcons fan, if you got to 9 wins, that means Matt Ryan's playing well. Calvin Ridley stepped up as a true wide receiver 1. Kyle Pitts made an immediate impact, and the offensive line stayed healthy. And it would give you hope for the future that, okay, find a few more difference makers on defense, solidify what Dean Pease is doing, or maybe even find a different defensive coordinator. I think Dean Pease is going to be pretty solid, though. So figure out what the defensive scheme is going to be and maybe make a run at it next year. But with that said, I had this team going 6-11. Again, I like a lot of the pieces in place, but some of those pieces include an aging quarterback. I'm not saying they should have gone quarterback in this year's draft, but it certainly would have hurt if they could have gotten Justin Fields. Maybe they just didn't like the grade on him at pick number 4, and there weren't trade down options. I wasn't in the war room, so I don't know. But the fact they have to restructure Matt Ryan's contract to get under the cap kind of just signals where this team is at right now. Like, they sold the present a couple years ago, 2, 3, 4 years ago. They sold everything they had. They sold the farm to try to win now and fell short of that goal. And now they are really getting the double-edged sword of not having a Lombardi and, suffering from all their actions earlier, kind of like the New Orleans Saints we'll talk about in a couple of days. But 6 wins feels a little low for a team that has a ton of talent, but I've also, over the past couple of years, been saying this team could be sneaky, right? They have the high-end talent. They could be, in the wild card race, not much more than that, and then they just are not in that. So maybe this is the year where I'm trying to learn from my mistakes. Realistic goal, this is a little different than what I've put previously in these videos, but maximize the offense, right? Like, if Arthur Smith can, keep in mind he was a former offensive line coach, you hope that he can get the most out of that core. I am concerned about the running back position, but we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Obviously, the pass catchers are pretty solid. Not even just Ridley, Kyle Pitts, but Hayden Hurst is a solid, tight end 2, depending on where you're playing Pitts. Russell Gage, solid 3rd target. And then a couple other guys that might be able to step up. And it helps having Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan, I hope that he can continue to fight regression. The arm strength has continued to be there, honestly. He's just somebody who's never really been good against pressure and how he fields it in the pocket. But other than that, pretty solid quarterback still. You hope that he can continue to, fight off the arm strength regression, because if he loses his arm strength, then I think things are going to start going downhill pretty quick for Matt Ryan. But I don't see that happening this year. I think he's got a year or 2 left before you start worrying about the arm strength. So maximize those offensive pieces and the mind of Arthur Smith, who's going to be the OC, and find defensive pieces for the future. Because now they're in this really tough line to walk where they have really good players on defense, but this team is 4 or 5 years away minimum from winning a Lombardi. I mean, I know I said if they go 9 wins this year, maybe they're a piece or two away, but really that's more in regards to making the playoffs. So maybe more generously, 3 years away. So then you have to consider, I think Grady Jarrett could be a part of that timeline, Deion Jones too, but some of the other older middle-of-the-road players, you have to make a decision. Can this team be a part of a potential championship window in 3 to 5 years, which I think 3 to 5 is probably on the early side of it. Sorry, Falcons fans, probably 4 to 6, 5 to 7. That's just kind of the nature of the business. It takes time. And if you're expecting draft classes to immediately hit, you're setting yourself up for failure. Look at the NFL draft as a whole. Don't look at the handful of guys, 2 handful of players who immediately make big impacts. A lot of those are in the first round anyways, and then you have some few mid to late round gems. Overall, when players start to make serious impacts and they can be relied upon as championship roster type of guys you can have playing every down, every snap, that's 2, 3, 4 years after they're drafted. So it's going to take some time. It's going to take a few drafts for this team to get there. So maximize the offense, find some defensive pieces that you can feel comfortable with and feel like they could be a part of a championship window in, let's just say, 3 to 5 years on the bright side, which every team obviously is looking at the best case scenario. Reach goal, finish over 500. Like I said, 9-8 is in the realm of possibility because of how good that offense is, and Dean Pease could scheme up enough pressure. AJ Terrell could take another leap forward in year 2. Richie Grant might be a guy who makes an immediate impact. Foyesé Oluokun, really good off-ball linebacker with Deion Jones, Grady Jarrett, and maybe some of these X factors that we'll talk about later on the defensive side step up and provide you with a big bolster to the defensive side of the ball. So 9-8, not impossible, and I think that would be enough to inspire hope moving forward for this Falcons team, and really under the leadership of Arthur Smith. That would be a really strong start to his tenure. X factors, Cordarrelle Patterson. This is something I'm so psyched for because the NFL has really started to kind of move in this direction where it's probably easier to move wide receivers to running back as opposed to vice versa. We'll see with Travis Etienne, that might be the opposite of that. But Patterson's different in the sense that he's not the 5'8", 165 little slot wide receiver that you're trying to make into a running back. He's always been the gadget guy. Even Tavon Austin's probably pretty good example of that. And speaking of Tavon Austin, I grew up at a time when his highlights were huge. That was one of the first big highlight compilations I ever saw on YouTube, some 8-10 years ago back when I was in middle school. If you haven't seen them, definitely go check them out. They are still some of the best highlights of any player I've ever seen. It's unbelievable. Cordarrelle Patterson, though, 6'1", 6'2", 200 plus pounds. But you look at the grades, and this is with PFF accounting for him moving to running back. Doesn't quite qualify for the rushing grade because he didn't have enough direct handoffs and things of that nature. 67.7 is actually a higher grade than Ezekiel Elliott back when I did the Cowboys video. So in a small sample size, that's encouraging. And of course, what he can do as a receiving player out of the backfield. 14th of 65, really like that. And overall grade, right around middle of the pack, and that's again on a small sample size. And you can't really weigh in the rushing grade when you're talking about that overall ranking. And he's the guy, considering Mike Davis is right now RB1 on the Falcons depth chart, the fact that Patterson's listed as RB2, Davis can catch the football, but between these two, obviously we feel more comfortable with Cordarrelle Patterson as a route runner and as a pass catcher. That's a really nice, interesting duo. Mike Davis has been a guy who's underrated and last year started to catch a lot of buzz, more so because of what he did immediately as the replacement to Chris McCaffrey. Kind of petered off in regards to efficiency and production towards the end of the year. But Patterson and Davis, really underrated backfield, and it buys into the idea that running backs are a dime a dozen. And if Atlanta's able to set up a successful running offense under Arthur Smith, this will be the team that everybody who says running backs don't matter, they will point to this team and say, look, Mike Davis playing for next to nothing. Cordarrelle Patterson's a wide receiver turned running back. This just proves their argument. So it's a really interesting case study with Cordarrelle Patterson this year. Next up, Dante Fowler Jr. This guy makes almost $11 million a year. He was a huge overpay, and he and Leonard Floyd both had their best years of their career and both got paid big time, thanks in part to Aaron Donald. So I hope they're at least taking him out to dinner. They honestly owe him a percentage. Aaron Donald is the second agent for Leonard Floyd and Dante Fowler alike. Fowler's got to be better. The grades are bad, but in context, sometimes it can be hard to understand where PFF grades, because you look at 60.9, you're like, well, that's not terrible. And that's just because pass rushers have enough plays that get registered, so their grade gets bumped up a little bit. Focus on the rankings. One of the worst run defenders in the game. And you could almost forgive that if he was an above average plus level pass rusher, but 71st of 99, literally in the 71st, 72nd percentile, that's abysmal. And then overall grade, one of the 6 worst edge defenders in the NFL for a guy making $11 million. Not much more needs to be said there. He has got to play better. And right now, going to the official Falcons depth chart, he is not listed as a starter at outside linebacker. Not joking. Literally. Go Google it. He is not listed as a starter, and that is mind-boggling. If they can get anything that is redeeming production out of him, it makes you feel better about what you're paying him at almost $11 million in the cap hit. And if he can play just anything better than this, it helps the pass rush and any sort of boot. It's only up from here compared to where they were last year and maybe even the year before. They just have got to get better in that department, and really Dante Fowler Jr. has got to take a step up. Next up, last X Factor is Fabian Moreau, and he's a guy who has never been talked about a lot, and rightfully so. We talked about Jeremy Reeves with the Washington football team, and his grades were fantastic, and he's somebody that nobody gets talked about. Fabian Moreau is middle of the road when it comes to his production and his evaluation between most people's eyes, PFF included, and he doesn't have a whole lot of snaps under his belt, but if he stays healthy, I'm really intrigued about him as the other outside corner, and Isaiah Oliver played significantly better down the stretch. Really considered making him an X Factor, consider him an honorable mention here, as well as I almost put Kyle Pitts. Really, that's more about how Arthur Smith uses him. Can they use him in a lot of different ways? But I feel confident in his mind. Getting to Fabian Moreau, if he can play well on the outside, that allows Isaiah Oliver to continue to play in the slot, where he got significantly better as a player down the stretch last year, kicking inside of that slot. So if you have AJ Terrell get better in year 2, and let's say he's above average corner, Fabian Moreau can play like a league starter, not asking for anything crazy there, just a league starting type of guy. And in the nickel, you get a step forward from Isaiah Oliver Jr., and he plays like an above average nickel. Next thing you know, that secondary doesn't look too bad with the additions of some of the signings at the safety spot, also the drafting of Richie Grant, which we talked about. Things can start to look up for that secondary, which will help improve the pass rush exponentially. So Fabian Moreau's not a guy that gets talked about a lot, but I do think there is some weight and some levity to that signing and some good potential for the Falcons if he hits. Games to watch, we'll close this video out. Week 5 against the Jets. Well, really all 3 of these games are games I feel like the Falcons maybe should be favored in. I haven't looked at the betting odds yet, and plus it's just really too far out to tell. But they're taking on the Jets week 5, technically at home, but the game's in London, so it's always kind of fun having really early Sunday football and kind of nice to wake up to. So additionally, this is 2 high-powered offenses whose defenses are lacking. I know there's a lot of Jets defenders out there and fans really who are hyping up their defensive line. I'm not trying to take that away from them, but overall that unit's pretty poor, and so is the Falcons. So this is going to be a really fun shootout to start your day with. So I'm looking forward to week 5. Week 12 at Jacksonville. Maybe they could steal one on the road. And I kind of mentioned this in the Washington football team video. Any game you can win away from home is a welcome sign. So maybe they're able to catch one on the Jags. Again, it's a fun one where I think that game could turn into a shootout. The Jags do have some defensive pieces I like. We'll see what they're doing with CJ Henderson, but still Shaq Griffin, Tyson Campbell. Rookie corners are a little so-so, but there's some good defensive players. I think a big bounce back year for Kayvon Chason. Josh Allen gets back on track. So it might not be quite the same as Falcons-Jets, but I still think that could be a fun, high-scoring game, and one the Falcons could win on the road. In the Week 16 against the Lions, the Falcons should be favored in this game, and I always like putting a game at the end of the year to, as I always mention, be a barometer. Did this team get better, or did they get worse throughout the year, or did they stay the same? Really, because if you're staying the same, you got worse. If you didn't make improvements, you didn't see guys develop throughout the year, you're a worse football team, and that would be a negative connotation and reflection on Arthur Smith and his coaching staff. So they should win this game against the Lions at home, and this could be a really good feel-good end of the year. Think about how the Chargers won the last, 4 games of the regular season, and it kind of gave this team positive momentum going into the offseason and now carrying over into the season, and you start to hear that buzz. So say the Falcons do get to 9 wins, and they win, let's say 3 straight to end the year. Positive buzz, winning record, year 2, Arthur Smith. I can start to see the headlines writing themselves now for the Falcons, but that's going to do it for my 2021 Atlanta Falcons season preview video. Tell me what you think about this team down in the comment section. How many wins did they get? Who are some X factors? What are some games you're looking forward to watch? I'd love to have your thoughts, and let's talk about the Falcons down below. Hopefully you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit that like button. It really would help me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, want more sports content like this, please consider hitting that big red subscribe button. That's going to do it for this one. Hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day. And until next time, my name is Tej, and I'm signing off.